uniform on.
Dread gang.
That Titan uniform, you better come to work.
You are now tuned
We will be perfect
into Dreadlock 100.
in every aspect of the game. You drop a pass, you run a mile. You miss a blocking assignment, you run a mile. You fumble the football, and I will break my foot off in your John Brown hind parts. And then you will run a mile. Perfection.
We about to break down the Moorish Empire.
Let's go to
Roll that shit, light that shit, smoke that shit. Let's get it.
The term Moor itself consistently referred to Muslims from North Africa, whether they were referring to the various Amazigh populations or other Africans who originated further south in places like Senegal, Guinea, or Mali. Despite what we in the diaspora may think, the term Moor is very broad and it's been used interchangeably between these two populations and was never used exclusively to refer to either of them in the literature. In some occasions, you'd even hear Europeans differentiating between the so-called white Moors and black Moors. There are many Moorish dynasties we can discuss, but my focus will be the Almoravids and the Almohads, so please keep that in mind. When the African diaspora thinks about a Moor, they tend to think of the black soldiers or rulers who conquered Spain, but we hardly ever refer to the names of the actual dynasties who accomplished this. It's important to be specific when speaking about Moorish history. When Islam spread across North Africa in the 7th century, many Africans converted and created their own Islamic armies to further the cause. These armies later became known as the Moors to various Europeans. It may surprise some of us to learn that black soldiers have been used in the Middle East since ancient times. They were not new. It was only because of the mobilization of Islam and the great number in which various Africans joined forces that they then became known as Moors later on in history. Under various Persian rulers, Africans were employed as mercenaries in armies to help conquer and control new regions. Africans in Nubia specifically had a world-renowned reputation for being excellent archers, and their services were in high demand. Even before the Arabs swept across North Africa, black soldiers were present in their armies. One of the earliest mentions of a black soldier, or what Europeans would later refer to as a Moor, was named Washi. Washi lived during the time of Muhammad, and it was said that he distinguished himself in battle, especially during the capture of Mecca. The truth is, in the early days of Islam, Arabs began to extend their hand to enslave people, whether they were from the Middle East or North Africa. They began to entice them to join their armies, and in return, they would gain freedom. This was an excellent strategy by the Arabs to gain a huge loyal following, and it greatly diversified their military ranks. Over time, this strategy began to be used amongst the Amazigh populations who converted to Islam. In the 9th century, North African slave armies became more desirable as ambitious Amazigh governors sought them out to create autonomous principalities. They believed these soldiers from Inner Africa would be loyal to them in totality because they didn't come from the ethnic group of the governor, and so was not invested in the needs and concerns of the majority population. The North African caliphs themselves began to adopt this tradition to comfortably enforce their power and not worry about any Arab or Amazigh dissidents. In other words, the recruitment of black men further south became the very backbone of Moorish supremacy. Black soldiers were always used in Islamic armies even before the 9th century, but they did not become supreme, if you will, until about this time. For example, under the Umayyad dynasty, the first emir of Cordoba in Spain, Abd al-Rahman I, who came to the throne in 756, was known to have kept a large personal guard of black troops. He founded the Muslim dynasty that ruled a large portion of Spain for nearly 3 centuries, and all his successors used black soldiers, especially to maintain order. Now here's where a lot of the confusion comes in. People may look at early Moorish history and say, well, the Moors were black people. However, we can't ignore the presence of Arab or Amazigh soldiers. In fact, at various times in Moorish history, there were more Arab and Amazigh soldiers than black soldiers, especially before the 9th century. If there is to be any value in the statement of saying the Moors were black people, we have to keep in mind that it's time sensitive, because when discussing events before the 9th century, we can only use it to express how black soldiers were used to reinforce the Sultan's power. When the 9th century arose, the face of the Moors began to change fairly quickly. Ahmad Tulin, who came to power in 884, the first independent ruler of Muslim Egypt, began to rely heavily on black soldiers, most of which came from Sudan, many of them Nubian. Upon his death, he's said to have possessed 24,000 so-called white soldiers and 45,000 black soldiers. In essence, his army consisted of black men. His son was protected by 1,000 black soldiers alone. One chronicler had this to say, "Wearing black cloaks and black turbans, so that a watcher could fancy them to be a black sea spreading over the face of the earth because of the blackness of their color and of their garments, with the glitter of their shields, of the chasing on their swords, and of the helmets under their turbans. They made a really splendid sight." So the 9th century really ushered in the power of black soldiers, giving Moorish armies its distinction. Any European army who had never seen black soldiers in such great numbers would have certainly spoken about it and identified them as being the power of the Muslims. And if we look throughout the literature, this is indeed the case. This is why Europeans in their artwork oftentimes represented the power of the Moors with an image of a black man. This is why the focus on the Almoravids and the Almohads is significant when speaking about our contribution as Afro-descendant people to Moorish history, because these two Moorish ruling dynasties in Spain arguably used the most black soldiers and had rulers who were indistinguishable from the various African ethnic groups further south, like in the case of Yaqub al-Manzur of the Almohads, whom I consider the greatest Moorish leader in the history of Muslim Spain. His mother was a black woman believed to be from either Mali or Senegal. One of the primary reasons for the rapid growth of black soldiers was the need for North African Amazigh rulers to have complete control over their soldiers and not be challenged by any intermediate power or opposing ethnic loyalties that would come from Arabs or other Amazigh clans. It would be very difficult for black soldiers originating from the interior of Africa to rally up the local Arab or Amazigh populace because of the ideological, social, and political divisions between them. It was black men who served to maintain the ruler in his palace, protect the capital, and uphold imperial authority. The Moorish tradition of black soldiers continued to develop in Morocco centuries after their expulsion from Spain in 1492. In the 17th century to the early 18th century, the Sultan of Morocco, Moulay Ismail, made great use of black soldiers to solidify his power. He himself was the son of an Arab prince and a black woman. Moulay Ismail felt the immediate threat to his rule would come from the Arabs, Amazighs, and the Turks in Algeria. He assembled the largest army in Moroccan history, consisting of 250,000 black soldiers, allowing him to exert great authority through which he was able to undermine the power and influence of local tribal groups in his nation. Moulay went even further by demanding that the other Moroccan ethnic groups turn over their weapons and their horses to his all-black Moorish army. Our agency in Moorish history as Afro-descendant people cannot be denied, as it so often has. There just needs to be balance when speaking about the Moors. We need to be specific about time periods and dynasties because diversity did indeed exist. Moorish history is akin to a blanket. We just have to identify our specific thread that makes up a part of the whole.
Dread gang. So what did we learn?
Master of my abilities. And today is gonna be a great and beautiful day.
Pillows, goose down, $35.